Hi, in this video we'll be looking at how we classify the cost of a non-current asset, or an NCA as an abbreviation. So we have discussed in a previous video how we define a non-current asset in our accounts, and these are the assets that a business owns that are used for 12 months or more, and so we view these as sort of long-term assets. We have current assets, which the business uses up in its day-to-day operations, and that will only last for less than 12 months. And we have our non-current assets, which are used in the long term. So when we think about the cost of a specific non-current asset, we are only going to be considering what we know as capital expenditure. So what do we mean more specifically by this capital expenditure? Well, the cost of a non-current asset is going to include the price paid for the asset. So say if we bought a new machine that cost us £1,000, well, we'd include this obviously in the cost of a non-current asset. This one seems quite obvious because that's the price we paid for it. But there are a few other things that we will include in the cost. So one of these is, say, any legal fees that were involved with the purchase. And so let's say if we paid £100 for any legal expenses when we were buying the asset, well, that would be included in the cost. Also, any delivery costs. So if it's a very big machine, these delivery costs may actually be quite sizable. So this is important to include for some assets in particular. So say if we had £50 for delivery, we would include that in the cost of a non-current asset. And the final one is any spending which improves the earning capacity of the assets. And this is a key point when we're talking about capital expenditure, and we discussed the difference between capital and revenue expenditure in a previous video. So this is not the maintenance costs of the asset, that will not be included, but any spending which improves the long-term earning capacity of the asset will be included in the cost. So if we bought, say, a 3D printer for £1,000, and then we also at the same time were to buy a new software to make this 3D printer operate more profitably for us, and we say spent £200 on software, this would be included in the cost of the non-current asset, assuming that it improves the earning capacity of the asset. So generally, these are the only four things that we're going to want to include. And I mean, this final bullet point, any spending which improves the earning capacity, that can include any number of things, but we think of these as four key areas to include. And that thus means that anything else that doesn't fall under these categories will not be included in the cost of a non-current asset. And these are the areas where, say, an exam question will try to catch you out. And so we do not include any revenue expenditure. And again, we discussed that in a previous video, and these are just, say, day-to-day running costs. So the repair cost for an asset, if it, say, breaks down or its value depreciates, fixing anything that's going wrong, we do not include that in the cost of an asset because that's a day-to-day running cost. Equally, any renewals, the cost of, say, repainting an asset, if it's, say, a building and we want to change it from white to blue, we don't include that in the cost of an asset either. And just more generally talking about day-to-day running costs, let's say if we use electricity in actually operating a machine, we don't include that in the cost. That's something separate, and that is revenue expenditure. So we make this distinction between capital and revenue expenditure and what's included in the costs because non-current assets are capitalized. Capitalization means that the costs of the asset are recorded over the life of the asset rather than only in the period the expense was incurred. So if we use this example up here, if I can sort of do a curly bracket around those, we can see that the costs of this asset would, say, be clearly 1,000 plus 100 plus 50 plus 200. So our cost of the asset here, if my maths is correct, will be £1,350. And if we continue with this 3D printer example and we say that this 3D printer is going to last us 5 years, we're not just going to stick this £1,350 in the year that we purchase the asset, because this asset is a non-current asset that we can capitalise, and we're using the asset over 5 years, so we can split up some of the cost of this asset over the course of 5 years. So say if we were to split the cost of the asset equally, in each year we'd have, say, £1,350 over £5 in our statement of financial position, and I'm not going to even try to do that calculation in my head because I'm not 100% sure what it is and I don't have a calculator to hand, but we can split the cost of the asset over the life of the asset rather than only in the period the expense was incurred, and this is an application of the accruals process, that we want to spread our cost over the times where our income is actually received. So an asset is going to be earning income over a period of time, so you want to spread out the cost to match up with these incomes, but I'll go into more detail on that in a future video. This video was just meant to cover the basics of how we define the cost, and we're looking at these 4 things here. And the final point here, which I think I've just mentioned, we record non-current assets and the cost of them on the statement of financial position, which again we have discussed in a previous video, so I won't go into more detail on that. That will conclude this video. Please do leave a like if you found it at all useful. Make sure to check out the playlist for more videos like this one, and subscribe to add some econ to your subscription feed.